Hello and welcome. This is a podcast explaining Ukraine by UkraineWorld.org, a website in English about Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Yermolenko. I'm chief editor of UkraineWorld.org. I'm joined today by my colleague Konstantin Romashko, who is the chief of the analytical department of Internews Ukraine and my good colleague in the work on UkraineWorld.org. Hello, Kostya.
Hello, Volodymyr. Nice to be here, and also very welcome that you have invited me to discuss the current developments.
So we are launching our experiment. We're launching a video podcast, not only audio podcast. So you can follow this podcast both on our typical platforms on Google, Apple, SoundCloud, but we also try to be on YouTube and to talk about the Ukrainian developments through this platform, the video platform. We are going to talk about the developments which are now going on in Ukraine. We have in the 3 months of the war, of the Russian invasion since 24th of February. We will talk a little bit about the situation on the front line, but also about the situation with the occupied territories, about the situation around sanctions against Russia, all this complex environment around which we are now discussing things. We'll also talk a little bit about Belarus, what's happening there, and if it's probable that Belarus will enter this war. With this, we also launched the series of analysis, Ukraine World Analysis, for you to understand that before making this podcast, we also talk with several Ukrainian experts in there's particular fields, the particular areas. We try to get as much expertise as possible. So let's talk about first the situation on the front line. What can we say about this? We have heard, of course, the news that Russians have not only destroyed Mariupol, but claimed full control over Mariupol. But at the same time, the situation in eastern Ukraine, they're trying to capture Donbass, and this situation is far from being optimistic for Russian army. It seems that there is a big stalemate on the front line. But what can we say, and what our Ukrainian military experts are saying about this, Kostya?
First of all, I want to say that the whole territory of Ukraine is like a battlefield, because the whole territory of Ukraine is being attacked by the missiles launched from Russia, from Russian territory, launched from Belarusian territory. But you are right. The biggest hotspots on the map of Ukraine now are Donbass territory and Kherson and the part of Zaporizhia Oblast. As Serhiy Haidai, the head of Luhansk Regional Military Administration, said that 90% of Luhansk Oblast has been already captured by Russian forces. So only 10% of this territory is ours now. For now, of course. The biggest hotspot, the biggest fightings are now taking place around Severodonetsk, around Popasna, around Rubizhne cities. The key aim of Russian troops here is to encircle Ukrainian troops and to make something like, how to say it in English, so something like, we say it in Ukrainian, kotel, to
big encirclement,
yes.
Big encirclement when the Ukrainian troops will not be able to escape.
Yes, will not be able to escape or will not be able to be provided with any help. By taking Severodonetsk, they may claim that, oh, okay, Luhansk Oblast is ours, so we have achieved some results in this war, because they can say that Luhansk was captured, something like that.
Indeed, I will agree with you that they renounced the idea of full-scale occupation of Ukraine. Therefore, they under Ukrainian attack, they left Kiev region, and we all know that. And Ukrainian victory in the Kiev region is one of the important results of this war so far. They are also retreating from Kharkiv region. So Kharkiv is a city where people are coming back. This is the second largest city in Ukraine. So they're trying really to focus on very specific, very small territories, and therefore Luhansk Oblast is one of the most important for them. They don't achieve any result in the Donetsk Oblast, by the way, so Ukrainian positions are very firm. The only difference is, of course, the south, where the Russians have taken Mariupol, have taken also such cities as Volnovakha and others. But basically, we can say that this drive, the assault of the Russian forces, is very, very slow. It's much slower than everybody has expected. The key issue, I think, is where it will be exhausted, when it will be exhausted, and when Ukrainian forces will be able to make a counteroffensive. What do you think, and what our experts are saying, Kostya?
Thank you, Volodya, for this question. Their thoughts are very actually different. Experts for give different forecasts about these possible counteroffensive of Ukrainian forces. If we look back at April, many experts told that Ukraine will find the ability to counter attack the Russian forces in early June. When we go back to the early May, they were saying that they shifted somehow this date. They were saying about that, okay, July, something like that. And now many experts saying that Ukraine will be able to hold massive counter-offensive operations against Russian troops in late August or in early September. But why? This mainly depends on these Western-style weapons that are being delivered to us by our partners. As soon as Ukraine have enough sufficient numbers of heavy weapons, only afterwards Ukrainian army will be able to hold massive counteroffensive. So at the meantime, we do not have the sufficient number of artillery, of anti-missile systems, and so on and so forth, to ensure the swift and sufficient counteroffensive.
That's true. That's exactly what I've heard as well, and there is commitment of these Western weapons, a very important commitment. We know about the Lend-Lease Act by the United States, but we should understand that the supply of the weapons is slow, is not as fast. So they're not coming on the next day after the decision is taken. And what Ukraine really needs is primarily artillery with long distance artillery, the howitzers, for example, which will help Ukrainian army to attack the Russian army, but at the same time be beyond the reach of the artillery of the Russian artillery. So indeed, the drastic changes on the front line are possible, but they are not to be probably expected in the coming weeks or the next month.
Here is one point, Volodymyr, I want to add actually, that all this chain of delivering the weapons consists of at least 2 points. First of all, it should be logistically delivered, and the second one, the people that will use these weapons should be trained sufficiently to use it on the battlefield. So, not coming weeks. I mean, maybe 2 or 3 months, and we will see this counteroffensive.
Yes, indeed, and this is very important during this time that the attention to this war is not diminishing, and that the international partners of Ukraine keep track on what's going on, because we understand that this war is going off the radars of the international media gradually, that there is a fatigue, a certain fatigue, information fatigue from this topic, but it doesn't mean that the war is stopped, it doesn't mean that the war has disappeared, and it is very dangerous that the war turns into a kind of a very slow process under which Russia keeps its occupied territories and Ukraine will not be able to counterattack or take them back. That will only mean that Russia will prepare the new offensive in the next years from these already territories. Because this offensive, let's not forget, was made possible only because Russia attacked from the territories it earlier occupied since 2014. Let's talk about these occupied territories right now. What's happening? What's happening there? Here we rely on the information we receive from the Ukrainian government, in particular from President's representative for Autonomous Republic of Crimea. Ukraine has this position, Tamila Tasheva, who is herself a Crimean Tatar human rights activist. Now she is the representative of Zelensky in Crimea, and she's dealing with the question of Crimea, but also of the occupied territories in the southern Ukraine, in Kherson Oblast. The situation in Kherson Oblast is very difficult because it is occupied, and there is information that about 500 people, Ukrainian activists, are in the so-called basements. So they are imprisoned or illegally imprisoned. They are kept by Russian forces, Russian FSB. Some of them are moved to Sevastopol in Crimea, and unfortunately there are reports that they have been tortured, including with the electricity, with current. So the Russian occupying forces are trying to really diminish the capacity of resistance, and they always have been doing this through violence, as we know. The second important element is that the civilians are not let out of Kherson Oblast. So the entry, the exit from these territories is prohibited by the Russians. There was recently the case when the column of civilian cars was shelled. We know from Kiev Oblast, where we visited, for example, Bucha, that or other villages around Kiev, that the shelling of civilian cars is a normal practice by the Russian army, unfortunately. And this is what's happening right now in Kherson. Why civilians are not let out of the city, out of the region? There are three reasons, probably. First reason, that Russians want to keep civilians as a human shield in the case that if Ukraine counterattacks, because Ukraine, of course, wants to take Kherson back and Kherson Oblast back. This is very important. But the question arises how to take big cities, right? How to seize the big cities. The second issue is, of course, that they try to mobilize these Kherson dwellers into the Russian army to attack Ukrainians. So to make Ukrainians attack other Ukrainians. And the third reason is that they probably want to make a referendum on so-called referendum on the so-called Kherson People's Republic, or attach it to Crimea. There is another possible scenario. So this is what's going on, and unfortunately, well, human rights violations are of course widespread there, and the climate of violence is also very, very high. Let's also move to another topic. I would like us to talk about Belarus, because there are so many questions whether Belarus will join this war. So Belarus dictator Alexander Lukashenko tries to avoid entering this war, although let's not forget that Russian attack on northern Ukraine, in particular on Kiev, was made from Belarusian territory, and there are lots of missile launch from the Belarusian territory. What can we say about Lukashenko in Belarus, Kost?
The ultimate interest of Lukashenko is to keep and capitalize on his own power in the country. So while trying to balance between Putin and to balance between this war and and between the will of Putin, the only thing he wants to do is to keep his power. While because embroiling into the war in Ukraine is very, very unpopular idea among his core electorate, among the society within Belarus, and as well as among the defense establishment. Uh, if he intervenes, it means that it will have an opposite effect on him. He can lose his power, and he knows this very well. If we are talking about the real or not real, the threat from the Belarus, I would say that as our experts say, as for example, uh, Igor Tishkevich says that Belarus only combat ready units are special operation forces. Only up to a half of them, around up to 7,000 people, could be deployed in Ukraine. And the certain level of threat could emerge to Kiev, to Ukraine, only if these special operation forces are complemented with 8,000 drafted reservists. And the general mobilization in Belarus is very unpopular idea. So I think that Lukashenko will try to keep on balancing between making the decision to intervene or not, and I think that he will keep on doing keep on conducting the same policy as he is conducting now. So the probability that he will intervene with his forces is very, very low.
Let's hope on that, because if Belarus enters this war with its military, it will be, of course, another headache for Ukrainians, especially in the western part of Ukraine, northern and western part of Ukraine. But indeed, Belarus doesn't have the real combat forces able to make a difference. And the last topic we would like to cover here is the question of sanctions, the issue of sanctions, and in particular the issue of gas and oil embargo. We talked recently with Ukrainian energy expert in the energy questions, Mikhailo Gonchar, well-known Ukrainian expert on these issues, and we asked him a question first: why gas and oil is so important for Russia, and second, is it possible to impose such an embargo, for example, on the part of the European Union? Because recently European Commission announced that it wants to cut EU dependency on Russian gas by 2/3 by the end of this year. Honchar, our interlocutor, is quite skeptical about it. He says that this is a good target by the European Commission, but a lot has to be done to achieve this target, and in particular by the major EU powers, France and Germany, in particular Germany, which is basically in the past decades was building its policy, its energy policy, based upon Russian supplies, primarily Russian supplies. What is needed, very much needed for Germany, for example, is to think about its energy mix and not to phase out nuclear energy as it is going on in Germany. The second very important issue is LNG, the liquefied natural gas. And for EU and Germany in particular, it's very important to turn to this liquefied natural gas, including the American gas, as much as possible. And the third issue is the cutting domestic consumption, in particular household consumption. So this is questions of household heating, whether the European households will be able to cut these heating habits by 1 or 2 degrees Celsius. Of course, that means more ascetic probably approach, but compared to what is happening in Ukraine, it's of course not so big a demand, because in Ukraine we're talking about thousands and thousands of people dead, many people, millions of people who are displaced, 6 million people who are refugees in other countries, many people who lost their homes, whose homes are destroyed. And it is very important to remember that we can impose sanctions on this or that particular people, but the basis of the Russian economy is oil and gas. This is the key locomotive, the key engine of Russian economy right now. And unfortunately, Russians are even increasing their revenues from gas and oil exports. Recent figures shows that it brings them $1 billion per day, gas and oil exports all over the world. It is also important to stress that these fears that Russians will just turn around and send their energy exports to China, these fears are overestimated, because the key supply chains the key pipeline chains, pipeline networks are going to Europe from the Soviet times. There are pipelines, of course, to China, in particular Sila Siberia, the force of Siberia, but they are not as powerful as those that are going to Europe. And more importantly, Russia cannot really play with China on these. China has the diversified sources of energy supplies, so China is dependent much less on Russia than the European Union on Russia. This is the complex of topics that are important to follow, and we try to keep you posted on these topics on our Twitter. Thank you, Kostya, for joining this podcast.
Thank you, Volodya, for hosting me here.
This was an Explaining Ukraine podcast. We try to be both in audio and video. Follow us on social networks, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, of course. Follow our website, UkraineWorld.org. You can also support us on Patreon, patreon.com/UkraineWorld. Stay with us and stand with Ukraine.
Stand with Ukraine. Bye-bye.